Hi, I'm Norm Abram. Welcome to the new Yankee Workshop. Could you use one of these? A portable chop saw station. You can use it around the house or set it up in your shop. And I'll show you how to build one next, right here in the new Yankee Workshop.
The new Yankee Workshop features the craftsmanship of Norm Abram.
Well, once again, we're on Nantucket. This time we're not here to look at furniture, we're here to look at what a carpenter builds for a saw station. Hi, Rick.
Hi, Norm. How you doing?
Good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Viewers of this old house might remember Rick Emory as one of the carpenters who worked on that project. And while we were doing that project, I took some interest in his saw station. In fact, he even asked me to autograph it for him. Now, Rick, why don't you take me through the whole process of why you built this in the first place?
Well, I built it to give myself more working area. You can see with the saw, you've only got a couple feet of working area. This gives you a full 8 feet, or there's a cleat here. We can attach extension tables on either end and go as long as we want.
So you can support those long pieces of wood.
We're working with crown moldings or good 16-foot pieces, yes.
And how did you start putting it together? You got some pretty fancy moldings
Well,
here.
it was stuff that was lying around the shop, and it was a 2x4 box
Underneath,
with a piece of plywood sitting on it. And obviously the space for the table, and we raised this up so that this is flush with the saw table.
Right, you want that absolutely flush, and you also want to line up this fence with the fence of the miter saw.
Exactly. And when I was done, I noticed that there were 2 big nice spaces in there, and I figured it'd be a great place to keep some sharp tools.
Wow, so you got all kinds of
I've got
chisels.
my chisels, my marking and measuring tools on this side. And on this side, paddle bits, the router bits I commonly use, twist bits, and some miscellaneous.
That's great because you don't have to keep running back and forth to your truck for these small accessories.
Everything's right in front of me.
You even clamped a drill press on one end of it here to cut some plugs. Now, I don't see a saw stop, though. What do you use for a saw stop?
You remember the old doweling jigs, Norm?
That's right. We don't use those very often anymore since we use biscuits.
What I'll do is measure out where I want to be and set my doweling jig. And there you go, you've got a stop.
That's great. So it's a new use for an old tool.
Yeah, that's handy.
The whole system is supported on just sawhorses.
Right, right.
Now, if you had to do it all over again, what would you change?
Well, I'd lighten the base up. Try to lighten the whole unit up. I would pad the saw up 3/4 of an inch and raise this, so I had another 3/4 of an inch of space in here.
Get tall router bits in there.
That way I could get hand planes in and stand my router bits up rather than having them lying down, beating up against one another.
But you'd still use the sawhorses as a support system?
Yeah, I like the sawhorses because I can keep my stock right in front of me and feed the saw right from here without moving.
All right. Well, you know, I want to build one of these in the new Yankee Workshop, and you've given me some good ideas.
No, I'll be interested in seeing it.
All right.
While you're here, you want to darken that signature up for me too, please?
Yeah, it's starting to fade a little.
Yeah, well, we get a lot of use.
Well, it seems that every carpenter has his own opinion about what a chop saw station should be like. It was useful to see Rick's, and here's my version with the features that I like. You could actually take this around to different job locations, or you could set it up permanently in your shop. This is the base unit, and to hold it up, I've made these standards just out of dimensional lumber and some bits of plywood. And they drop into place and get held in with a couple hooks. Now, I built the project primarily out of MDO plywood, which has that nice smooth surface on it. It's good and tough, and it'll hold up to a lot of hard use. Now, once the legs are in place, you just flip it over again and stand it up. Now, one of the features that I like about a chop saw station is to have it high so that I can see the marks on the wood as I'm using the saw. The saw that I'm using in this setup is a 10-inch compound miter saw, and it simply slips in between some blocks that are up on the tabletop, and they're very tight so that it can't move forward and back or side to side. Now, depending on your miter saw, you may have to make this opening a bit wider and modify the fence so that it matches up with your saw's fence. One of the things that's really necessary on a miter station is a long extended fence. To accomplish that, I built this U-shaped piece that slides out, and then the fence is hinged so it just pivots around. Then I lock it in place with a little barrel bolt. Now this is the simple side. On this end, it's the same type of fence mechanism with one added feature. It has a tape strip right along the top of it, and that allows me to use this little accessory. It's a stop block, and that just slips over the fence, and I can lock it down on the measurement that I want and cut several pieces exactly the same length. Now, if you'd like to build a version of our miter saw, a measured drawing is available with the materials list, and you'll hear more about that before the program ends. The first thing I want to build today is the table itself. So I've started by ripping a piece of plywood to the correct width. Now I want to cut it to length, and to do that, I've set up a straight edge guide, and I'm going to use my small circular saw. But before we use any power tools, let's take a moment to talk about shop safety. Be sure to read, understand, and follow all the safety rules that come with your power tools. Knowing how to use your power tools properly will greatly reduce the risk of personal injury. And remember this, there is no more important safety rule than to wear these safety glasses. The next step is to trim off the corners. I don't want 90-degree corners that I can get hung up on. And that's just a simple matter of trimming them with the circular saw. It's important that the top of the chop saw station not deflect or sag under its own weight. And how I accomplish that is to put a beam or a stiffener under the top, a 5-inch wide piece of plywood that sits in a dado. To make the dado, I've set up my stacked dado head cutter in the table saw and adjusted the fence to the right dimension. Now I'll use the chop saw station to knock the corners off of the stiffeners. If you take a look under the chop saw station, you'll see that there are some pieces between the stiffeners, a couple pieces in the middle which support the miter saw, and then a couple pieces of plywood set at a 10-degree angle to receive the leg assemblies. I want dados in the stiffener to receive those pieces, so I've moved the dado head to my radial arm and set it up for a 1/8 inch deep cut. Next, I want to make the cross pieces that receive the leg assemblies. And because the dados are at an angle, if I simply leave the cross pieces square, it'll be uneven at the bottom, and I won't have full bearing against the underside of the top. So what I want to do is bevel both edges, which will give me a nice flush piece at the bottom and full bearing at the top. To do that, I've set the table saw at 10 degrees, and I beveled one edge of this larger piece. Now I'll just run 4 pieces. Now I'm ready to cut the cross pieces to length, and for that I'm going to use my stop. Drop it over the fence, slide it over to the measurement, in this case 16 1/4, and cut the 4 pieces. Well, now I'm ready to start some assembly, putting together the frame that sits under the top. I'm applying a little bit of adhesive in each of the dados. This is a marine adhesive, so if I happen to use this project outdoors and it gets wet, it'll stay together. Plus, this is incredibly strong adhesive. Now I'll just pre-drill some holes for some 1 5/8 screws. With some more adhesive in the grooves of the top, I'm going to drop it over the frame, get it in position, and attach it with some more screws. I've just made a couple blocks out of some framing material, beveled at 10 degrees, just like the plywood was for the pockets to receive the legs. And I want to put those between so that these pieces of plywood can't spread apart once the legs are in place. A little glue and screws will hold them in place. Now I'm ready to make the legs, and because they splay out to the side and towards the end, the cuts have to be compound cuts. So I've tipped the saw to 10 degrees and turned it to 10 degrees. And once again, I'll be using my stop block to get all the pieces the same length. For the last few minutes, I've been plowing out dados in the legs. And they're going to receive these plywood stretchers. I want to make sure the joint is nice and tight, because that's where I'm going to get all the strength. I simply turn my radial arm saw to 10 degrees and plow out between the layout lines. With the mitre saw set at 10 degrees, I can cut both the top and bottom stretches to length. Now we can put the legs together. Now we're ready to start working on the fence. Let me show you the details of the fixed fence. There's a 6-inch piece in the back that has a dado that receives the shelf, and then there's another piece in the front that supports the shelf, which is connected by biscuits and glue. That's the dado I need. Now let's cut some biscuit slots. Now I can assemble those sections of the fence. A little more of that adhesive in the dado. And I'll just slip the shelf in place. Flip it over. Drill a few holes for some screws. Now some glue and biscuits, and then a little bead of the marine adhesive between the biscuits. Now I just bring the two pieces together. And to hold it in place while the glue sets, I'm just going to drive a few 1.5-inch brads. Okay, now that takes care of the fence for the other side of the saw. This little block goes at the end of the fence closest to the saw, and all it's there for is to really keep sawdust from building up in the trough. Now I'm getting ready to attach the fence sections to the table, and I need to cut corresponding slots in the tabletop to match those in the fence. So I've clamped my level as a straight edge, and I'll simply run the biscuit joiner against the level and cut the slots. Now between the glue, the biscuits, and the marine adhesive, this fence is not going to move. With these clamped in place, we'll let them set overnight, and tomorrow we'll easily finish this chop saw station. Good morning. In no time we'll be able to start using our saw station. Last night the glue set up on the fixed fences, and now I'm ready to set the saw in position. I've attached the cleats along the back of the saw. It's not so important to hold the saw down as it is to keep it from moving front to back or side to side. So we'll drop the saw in up against those blocks. That aligns the fences so they're perfectly even. And the next piece to put in are these little blocks at the front, and they will secure the mitre box. A little bit of glue and some brads will hold them in place. Well, now it's time to cut the handholds to carry the saw station, and I got lucky. This is an old jig that I had from years ago when I built a butler's table. It was the hand cutouts on the leaves of the table. All I'm going to do is clamp it to the center line where I want to make the hole, and then I'll cut it out using my router. My router is set up with a collar and a 3/8 inch straight cutting bit. The collar will follow the inside of the cutout, the bit will do the work. Works great, watch. A 1/4 inch radius roundover bit eases the edges of the handhole. Let's look again at the prototype. The adjustable section of the fence is supported by these removable tracks so that they can be slid out of the way when the piece is transported. They're made up of 3 pieces of plywood joined at the corners with glue, biscuits, and brads, just as I did with the fixed fence. There's a little dowel in the bottom that allows you to pull it out easily, and there's a slot along the top through which this screw passes to act as a stop. To make the slot, I'm using a 3/8 inch bit in my router table. I've transferred marks to my fence, which shows me the leading and trailing edge of the bit, and I just aligned those marks with my layout marks here at the edge and ran the piece through. That's the hole for the dowel handle. That's that. Now there's the pilot hole for the screw that's going to act as the stop. The extensions are pretty simple, just a couple pieces of plywood. Here are the pieces for the one we're building today. The vertical piece has a groove to receive the shelf. I've clipped the corners so there's no pointed edges, but there's one more detail I want to make, and that's to bevel the bottom edge of the vertical piece so that when you fold it up, it won't bind if there's sawdust in the way. Well, once again, I'm going to turn to my marine adhesive. You never know, I might be using this project outdoors. Okay, now just set it in place, pre-drill some holes, and attach it with some screws. To join the sections of fence together, I used a short piece of piano hinge on the prototype. That's fine for joining the pieces, but it presents a problem. If I slide the stop over, it gets hung up on the knuckle unless I recess the hinge, and I had to taper the pieces to allow that to happen. Since that time, I found a better solution. These little barrel hinges fit into mortises that are in the end of the plywood. So it's totally concealed and it won't get in the way of the fence, and it still swings 180 degrees for storage. Drilling the holes has to be done very precisely, so I've made this hardwood jig to guide the drill bit. I just clamp it in place and drill the holes. If I don't get them in the right place, it's not going to work. Now to secure the hinge in the hole, there's a tiny little screw that once we set it down, it expands the barrel. Okay, let's see how it works. That's great. Now I've just cut a couple slots in the horizontal pieces of the fence, and I'm going to put a biscuit in the piece that swings around, and all that's really there for is so that the surfaces will align when they're in the usable position. For the last few minutes, I've been applying these hardwood strips. They're not really necessary, they just kind of dress up the piece by covering the most exposed plywood edges. Any hardwood will do. The last element to make is the saw stop. It starts out as a piece of plywood with the corners clipped off, and the first thing I want to do is drill a hole for this carriage bolt. Here I've traced the outline of a nut. I'm going to chisel out the area and then freeze the nut with some epoxy. Now if you notice on the back side of the stop there's this pointer, and it's adjustable to compensate for different size saw kerfs. I want to nibble away the material to make that lap joint. And that takes care of the corresponding notch. Here I've returned to the first piece that I notched, and I'm removing a bit of material so that there's room for the knuckle of the hinge so the leaf will sit flat. These screws secure the piece that I was just working on, that ultimately rides along the top of the fence. Now I'm ready to start working on this piece, which goes on the back of the fence. First thing I have to do is make a very slight mortise to receive the knuckle of the hinge. And then up above I want to drill a hole for the carriage bolt to go in. And the hole is about halfway through. That secures one side of the hinge, and that takes care of the other side of the hinge. I'll show you in a minute what that elongated hole is for. With that slotted hole, I'm able to adjust the pointer and then secure it with this screw. Now here's a piece of mahogany that I'm going to use for the handle to tighten the stop down. I've just drilled a counter bore for the head of the carriage bolt. Now I'll change bits and drill a through hole. Here I've mixed up a little bit of quick setting epoxy to secure the bolt in the handle so that it can't spin. And the stop also gets wrapped with some hardwood strips. The last thing to do to the stop is install these small lag screws. And this is where the stock is going to hit the stop. With this adhesive back tape installed, I can now cut pieces accurately to length. Well, this project turned out very well. I hope that you'll build one. I can't tell you how long I've wanted to build one. Now I have two.